This is Kevin Pruitt with Shawn Askinosie on another episode of Rising Tide Startups. Shawn, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So, who is Shawn Askinosie?
Ooh, great question. In fact, I actually think that question is one that we need to ask ourselves every day. Not who's Shawn Askinosie, but who is me, Yeah. But anyway, I'm the CEO founder of Askinosie Chocolate and started that chocolate factory about 11 years ago. We're bean-to-bar chocolate makers. And before that, I was a criminal defense lawyer for 20 years. And we are based in Springfield, Missouri, and a very small family business of 16 full-time employees and selling our chocolate around the U.S.
And you're based, that's like on Commercial Street or in the Commercial Street district?
Right. We are based on Commercial Street we own a few buildings here for our factory, our offices, and then our cocoa bean warehouse.
Okay. So all operations are in Springfield?
All the operations are here in Springfield. My daughter, Lauren, is our chief marketing officer, but she works for us remotely from Austin, Texas.
Okay. All right. So how does one transition from being a criminal defense attorney to making chocolate? I know that's a short question with a long answer, probably.
Yes. Well, the way first is for me, I like to try to describe this transition in a way that I hope other people will see themselves. Not that you have a bunch of criminal defense lawyers waiting to be chocolate makers out there listening to you, but I know in your listening audience you have people who are in job A thinking about what's next. And so for me, the way the transition began was physically that I was no longer called to do the work that I was doing. I could feel I wasn't feeling good physically, and I was just not feeling the work, which was criminal defense law, very serious criminal cases. I guess I kind of built my reputation in the defense of murder cases, and that if you aren't called to that, it can really take its toll on you physically, emotionally, spiritually, every way. But I was called to it until I wasn't. And so I just kind of felt it in my body. And I think that that's the first place of awareness, at least for me, that the transition needed to happen. So this wasn't one of those things where I'd been dreaming of chocolate my whole life and thought, I think I'll, find the right time in my criminal defense career to do that. No, this was one of those things where I loved it. I loved the courtroom. I loved everything about it. And then I could feel it when I stopped loving it. And so that's the way the transition started for me, was just the feeling physically, then emotionally, and then spiritually, all those things. And then it was a 5-year process to find the next thing. So
during that period of time, did you continue to practice law for those 5 years, or was there like a hiatus, like a stop, like a gap that said, okay, I'm no longer practicing law, but I haven't done the chocolate yet, so I've got 2 years to find myself? Or how would you describe that interim period, or that transit, that, as Seth Godin would say, that pivot?
Yes. No, I continued to practice law every day, and it was one of those things that I knew I had to get out. I felt like I had a lot of opportunities in front of me. And I think this is often the case with entrepreneurs, is they're thinking, hey, I'm doing pretty good where I am right now. I feel good about my job. I feel good about my income and my level of success, but I can't do it anymore. And then is the paradox of choice. That is brought to you by Google Incorporated. We now see, just this dashboard, literally and figuratively, of opportunity that presents a paradox of choice. Then when we don't feel drawn to any of those things, or at least when I did not feel drawn, pulled toward those as an inspiration and new passion for me, then I became more desperate. So what I found is the more desperate that I became to find the next thing, the further away from my reach it was. And that was hard. And so I went through a period of, like I said before, not feeling good. I felt tired. I felt fatigued. I felt depressed. I started taking antidepressants after my doctor said I should go see a psychologist. I started just looking at everything that I could. And so this was a very long 5-year process of continuing to practice law and then finding this next thing.
Well, before our interview, you had sent me a copy of a book that you had written. I guess you and Lauren had written together, called Meaningful Work, A Quest to Do Great Business, Find Your Calling, and Feed Your Soul. Now, I don't know if you knew this or not, but maybe God instructed you to send this to me, because this book really spoke to me. And as a matter of fact, those that are listening to the podcast, if you get on our website and you offer feedback through our feedback form, the first 5 that do that, I'm going to order this book and send it to them. So we want people to engage, and I just encourage you to go get the book. I'll have it in the show notes as well. But I love the idea, especially. I mean, I read the entire thing, so I'm going to ask you things throughout the book.
Okay.
So
you're the one. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure there's more. I love, though, the way you started about and I'm gonna butcher this, so please forgive me. So you clarify, but something about finding joy in our deepest sorrow, just that whole idea.
Yeah.
So
yes, no, you did not butcher it.
You unpack
captured
that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Well, I quote the philosopher poet Khalil Gibran, who said, "Our greatest joy is our sorrow unmasked." And I didn't know that at the time when I was going through this 5-year process, but as I reflect back on it, I see that that sentiment that we're talking about now is in many ways a mysterious, paradoxical key that unlocked meaningful work for me. So what I mean by that is that all of us, by our age, whatever it may be, almost all of us have experienced some kind of broken heart, some kind of sorrow in our lives. And to those people who are saying, no, I really can't think of any sorrow or broken heart in my life, then I say, call me. We need to talk about much more complicated things in your life, about why you haven't experienced a broken heart, because it's part of life. And so I'm saying, what I'm saying is that if we can begin to explore the sorrows in our life, in some cases deep, deep sorrows, then it can be the place and the beginning point and the returning point of great joy in our lives. And the way that worked for me was when I was going through this 5-year process of trying to figure out what's next, becoming more and more desperate, not finding anything, all the while, every day, committing this search to a very simple prayer that went like this: Dear God, please give me something else to do. And I said it sometimes multiple times a day, and that it was just very simple. But what happened is my dad died when I was 14 years old of lung cancer, and he was my hero and lawyer. He was a lawyer like me, and back then there was a prayer group starting in our church, the Episcopal Church, that was a charismatic church, which is kind of weird, charismatic Episcopal Church. And this prayer group would come over and lay hands on my dad, and they would talk in tongues, and it kind of freaked me out. And they would speak very loudly. This is the beginning in the early to mid 70s of prosperity theology in the United States in all churches. And so they told me, they laid hands on him, would come over all hours of the day and night. And they would, in some cases, be loud. And it scared me. And they were, in some cases, mean. Here's an example. The leader of the prayer group told me to never speak with my father about death. He said, if you do that, then that will be a sign of doubt and Jesus won't heal him. So every time my dad tried to talk about death, I pushed him away and said, Dad, we can't talk about this. And the cancer spread throughout his body, and it eventually went to his brain. And the night he died, I was with him. He was at home, and I've never been more desperate in my life. I prayed out loud to God that night, hysterically, please don't let him die. Please don't let him die. And he did die. And so fast forward the tape 25 years, and I decided to begin a conversation with that grief that I never really had. And so what I did is and I talk about this in the book, but I started going to this place called Assumption Abbey, which is a monastery in the Mark Twain National Forest, about 2 hours from my house. And the reason I went there is because it's where my dad spent his last night before he came home. He was on a men's church retreat. So I decided to go there. Well, anyway, in one of my retreats there, I got this idea while I was walking to go volunteer at a local hospital with patients that are dying. So they let me volunteer for them in the palliative care department, which is end of life care. And they gave me a list of patients. And they said, okay, go visit these patients as a volunteer. Some were oncology, some cardiology, and some neurology. But they were all in some state of dying. And most of them didn't have a relative or friend there. And so I would just go in and visit with them and talk with them just about whatever. And many of them were very lonely. And at the end of my visit, I always said, well, one of the things I do as a volunteer is pray for people. Would you like me to say a prayer for you? Well, 99% of people who are dying will take a prayer.
Sure.
And so I said this. I said, what would you like me to pray for? And they would say, well, would you pray that I live 2 more weeks to my 65th wedding anniversary? Or would you pray that I die today because I'm in pain and I'm ready to go? Or would you pray that I am healed, that I walk out of here? I prayed their exact prayer, their exact words. I didn't judge their words. So what's happening here? What's happening is I was doing the opposite of what happened to me as a child when I was in such sorrow, when the prayer group was, just being mean about this healing business. And so what happened is I would ask the people before I prayed for them, I'd say, could I touch your hand or your shoulder while I pray for you? And they said yes. And this is the key. And if your listeners just only listen to this and then turn it off, it's fine. This is what I want to relay. In those few seconds, literally measured in seconds, I thought about someone besides me. And I walked out of the hospital on many days, not all days. I did this for about, between maybe 3 or 4 years. On Fridays, when I would walk out to my car, there were days that I felt like my feet weren't on the parking lot pavement, that they were 3 or 4 feet above the pavement, that there was such joy. How could that be? This is a morbid thing, some people would say. You're with people who are dying. Well, it's because it was born out of my deep, deep sorrow. And so what Khalil Gibran is saying is that, the deeper the sorrow, the greater the joy. So I was almost like floating because I actually thought about someone besides me in the pain point of my life. And so this paradoxical thing happened. Gandhi says, if you want to find yourself, then or if you want to find yourself, lose yourself in the service of others. And Christ said practically the exact same thing. And so that's what happened. That's the mystery. So it's not that the ends justify the means. It's that you serve someone, and that's what happened with me. And then there was just like this space to think about something else besides all of the noise in front of me about what I should do. That is how it happened. That's how it happened.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that abbey. So beside my bed, long before you sent me the book, long before we even connected, I have a book about that abbey sitting on my nightstand.
Wow.
I grew up in a little town called Mountain Grove, Missouri, which is about 20 minutes from where that abbey is, and
amazing.
Have known about that since that abbey and those strange guys in the furry suits, out there for many years. But it's amazing how many intersections that we're going to have on this short interview. But I really, and if our listeners have listened to other episodes, I have a pretty set list of questions that we try to go through. But this one, and we even talked beforehand, before I turned the recorder on, that I really want to give you space, Shawn, to share just the depth of your story and kind of the stages of that. So, because I really think it will speak to our listeners at a very deep level. We spent time as a family in the Middle East, so we understand in the Arab mindset, there's not this separation between the spiritual world and the natural world. It is completely intertwined. Khalil Gibran would have the same mindset. And so when I was reading through this book, it's almost like you have, as a Western, you also understand the Eastern mindset that says everything in life is connected. And you can talk about the things that happen with your father. You can talk about how, you've spent time at the Abbey. You spent time just in personal reflection. Nothing in God's economy is wasted. I mean, every experience is that you've had leading up to this is probably preparing you for whatever the next stage is. So I don't want to hear myself talk. I want to give you more time to unpack this as, I had a couple other things that I wanted to touch on in the book that are related specifically to your business.
Sure.
If you don't mind, I just want to mention a couple of quotes and kind of let you unpack those. But I love this, this is the section where you're talking about how you want to run your company and how you want to be a CEO with a heart. You said, I hope to let the light of my dignity be a lamp for my fellow workers and shine collectively upon the work we decide to do together for good purposes. Is there a better mission statement in the world than what you just wrote there?
Well, thanks for saying that. I use the metaphor of light a lot, and of course it's throughout the Bible. And I love it because I believe that this idea of not asking too much of ourselves, but to sort of be co-participants with the people we work with, the people that we do business with, the people in our neighborhood, as lights, then we have this chance to really make sustainable difference in the world. And I believe that true sustainability comes from this idea and the use of this metaphor that I'm talking about as a light. I also get it from my favorite theologian that I quote in the book, all over the book, Jean Vanier, who is a Catholic theologian, and he also talks a lot about he says we're not a solution, we're a sign, and that's what I want to be. I don't claim to be a solution. What I say is it's a sign. So I want people to read the book or hear this podcast and think, I don't need to duplicate this exactly, or this isn't some template. What it is it's a sign. It's a light. I see this light on over here. Hey, I can be a light too. I can create my version of a little light that will have both an interior reflection and an exterior reflection. And I talk about this a lot. And what I mean by that is I think that business leaders owe it to themselves, to their families and their communities to have a rich interior life. And that can take its shape however the person wants it to take shape. But I believe that if we cultivate our interior life, and for me, what I mean by that is prayer, reading, meditation, all of these things. And as I talk about in the book, for me, a rule of life, based loosely on the rule of Benedict. But so if we can cultivate this interior life, then I think it gives us an opportunity to be more aware in our exterior life, in the external world, of the needs around us, literally right around us, in our family, among our coworkers. Why is that? It's because it's a practice. The practice of cultivating our interior life then builds us for the opportunities to express, as you and I would say, the fruits of the Spirit. And so that's what I mean by this. And so when we see ourselves sort of rising up with greater compassion, I think it's often because we've done some things to cultivate our interior life. And I don't think it has to be a big deal. I think there are many small things that enrich their interior and exterior life. And so that's what I mean by that. I also think that we have to stretch ourselves in terms of not by way of just setting goals for ourselves, but we have to stretch and maybe do more than we think we're capable of when it comes to serving others in our business and in our business life. But at the same time, I feel as though we could all use, me included, especially me, to understand what it means to operate and lead with humility. And so that's also what I mean by that quote that you just read. And again, I believe that when we cultivate our interior life, that it will lead to greater humility because we have an understanding of just exactly what it is that we don't know about the world.
Right.
So that's, yeah.
I love that you've unpacked that, and my next quote is actually just leading from that, and one quick segue I wanted to take is social justice and social enterprise is a real hot button issue now. One thing I think that you and I would agree on is it's not enough just to do good things. There has to be a recognition, I think, in the person that is actually trying to provide that service that it is also that you're open to receiving as well. And you talk about that a little bit about a trip to Tanzania, that we don't go to Tanzania to change Tanzania. We go to Tanzania so Tanzania can change us or something to that effect. And, I love that whole idea. But what I want to do is touch real quick about your growth strategy. I mean, you're really, as Christ did 2,000 years ago, you kind of flipped the whole thing upside down. You've really flipped the business ecosystem upside down because you've had a life change and you've had so much influence through your time at the Abbey and other influences that you've encountered recently. But this says, how do we define growth? It says, we define growth more broadly than the traditional business world. A changed heart, interior peace, higher quality products, reduced debt, more efficient workflow, higher pay for staff, and the like will transform us little by little, and that's the kind of growth we hope never ceases. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of growth that's kind of hard to measure on a bottom line.
Mm-hmm. It is hard to measure on a bottom line, and it's hard to measure in any way, in a small business or in a large business. What I'm trying to ask people to consider the way in which we've been conditioned to believe in this country that we must grow at all cost, and that we must be dependent on consumption in order to be perceived healthy as an economy, to run our businesses. And so I ask in the book, in chapter 3, how much is enough? How much is it? Yep. And I think as business people, we owe it to our businesses and ourselves to say, well, what exactly is that? Even top line sales, how much is enough? How much do we need? What is success? So many people say, well, I don't need to ask that question. I just need to grow by 20% a year or 15% a year top line. Well, that's a trap. And I think it's a trap from a macro standpoint economically in the United States by measuring our GDP around the world. And I think it's a trap for our businesses. And what I ask people to consider, just because it's the model that I know, and that is monasteries. Benedictine monasteries for 1,500 years have been managed by the rule of Benedict all over the world by asking this exact question: how much is enough? Well, the answer is really simple. The amount that's enough is what is sufficient. Oh, so you mean it's not just grow, grow, grow? No, it's what is sufficient. And honestly, that can be a more challenging question, and it requires a lot of thought and analysis. That is, what is sufficient for me, or if I was running a monastery, which I'm not, but in the monastery, they only brew enough beer for what they need. We see, you read about this famous Trappist beer. They could brew a whole bunch more beer and make a whole lot more money, but they brew what they need for that year to be sufficient so they can have what they need. And so for us, lay people, living outside of a monastery, we can ask that question and we can say, well, what is sufficient and what does that mean to me as a business owner? Well, maybe I want to pay my folks more money. Maybe I'm a small business and I'd like to be able to give raises and offer benefits. Like for us, knock on wood, we're just now offering health insurance for the first time. I'm super, super excited about it. And that is an area of sufficiency for us, or debt reduction, like we were saying. These things can be individually determined, but I think they're hard questions to answer, but I think that we'll be the better for it by asking ourselves. And then the thing that people say is, well, wait, don't you want just massive consumption of your chocolate bar that costs, $8 or $9 or $10? No, I mean, I want people to buy my chocolate bars, of course, but I want to be part of mindful consumption, and if that means that our growth is less than it would be if there was not mindful consumption, then I'm proud to be part of it. That's the ecosystem in which I operate, and I want to be part of that.
Well, I wanted to ask you. I mean, I could this interview could go on for all afternoon, and I know that you've got other things to do as well. But I want to, as we're kind of heading toward wrapping this up, I know that you've done very well with your chocolate company. You were very successful as an attorney before that, but we all have, obstacles and pain points that we face. So if you could identify one or two pain points that you face fairly often that maybe we have a broad variety of listeners. We have some that are, like I mentioned before, we have very early stage, and we have some that are, far down the road that have wealth and years of experience. So what would be one or two pain points that you would think that you could identify that Askinosie Chocolate faces, fairly often?
Sure. Well, one pain point that we started with and that we continue to face, and so I've been doing this for 11 years now, full time, and one of the pain points that we face is cash flow. And my wife is very debt averse, and we've been married for 31 years. She does not like debt. Me, I love debt. If you said, "Hey, Shawn, I'll loan you what's in my wallet," I'd be like, "Great, let's do it." Not her. And thankfully, because she really has had a hand in being really pretty strong in her opinion about this, we're a healthy company because of it. But because we don't have a big fat line of credit, we spend a lot of time managing cash flow. And there are times of the year, especially the third quarter in the summer, it just so happens that's when I have to pay farmers often in advance for their crops of cocoa beans. And it's also when our sales are lowest for a chocolate factory, which our big sales are in the fourth quarter for the holidays. And so that remains a pain point for me. And so we're always, trying to find ways to not only manage cash flow, but we also have we've developed some pretty sophisticated tools to watch it and to plan for it the best we can. But watching and planning are not the same thing as living and managing while it's happening.
Absolutely.
And so that is a definite pain point. I would say another pain point is we are, of course, feeling the effects of the increase in online sales on our own website. And so we want people to buy off of our website, askinosie.com. And it's grown for us over the years, but we don't sell on Amazon. We're not going to sell on Amazon. And we sell to about 900 stores around the country, all over the country, small specialty food stores in most cases. And we are seeing, that some of our friends and colleagues that own those stores are having some of them are having challenging times, and that is a pain point for us, because what it means is that some of our customers are going out of business, and we, who don't have a ton of capital to throw around, we're managing our online sales, and that is a sort of transition that we've been experiencing and managing and leading over the last 3+ years. And so if I had $1 million to go spend on my website, then I wouldn't have said that as a pain point, because I would already have everything all perfect and wrapped up. But it is a pain point, and you didn't ask for three, but I would say the third pain point is I talk a lot in the book about living a life of being inserted by doing. And it was one of the big challenges for me as a family brother at Assumption Abbey. It remains a challenge for me as an entrepreneur who's motivated. I want to, do things, and some of those things include helping people. I want to feed kids. I want to pay our people more money. I want to profit share with farmers, as I've done for 11 years. And I have to remember that one of the greatest callings on my life is to live a life of being inserted by doing, and not a life of doing inserted by being. And that is, I would say, maybe the overarching pain point of my life. And the way I'm dealing with that is the first thing is, number one, by being aware of it. Two, by naming it. We're talking about it now, so I say it out loud.
Yep.
And recognize it as a challenge. And so it is not just a prayer of mine, but it's also something that I have to actively practice. And that includes saying no to some things. And my spiritual director at the Abbey, an 87-year-old monk, Father Cyprian, helps me with that, and he's been a monk since 1952. And you'd think, well, what would he know about business advice? But he does. And he knows how to tell me. He knows how to tell me that I'm exhibiting signs of instability, and that I need to be careful. I need to pull things back because of my commitment to a life of being. So those are some pain points.
So, really quickly on this one, how does your staff react when you come back from retreats?
They think
he's got some crazy ideas again. Here he comes again.
Well, you know what? Now they know I don't come back from retreats with ideas. I don't come back from my time at the Abbey with ideas. And I've over the 17 years that I've been going to the Abbey, and now for the last 4 as a family brother, I've taught myself to not want to come back with ideas. I don't want to go there with the intention of finding answers. I want to go there with the intention of resting in God's presence. And I may not even pay attention to it, because I have had insight. I mean, I told you I had that insight years and years ago at the Abbey about going to visit patients who were dying. So I've experienced insight and, yes, ideas, but so they know that my staff, they know when I come back that maybe I'll be rested or maybe I won't. There are times when I go to the Abbey and it isn't restful at all. I will have had trouble sleeping, or maybe I've been wrestling with some issue with God about something in my life, and they know, the people, my staff know, that I will pray for them and while I'm there, and they've experienced me doing this for so long now, they kind of know that I'm not going to come back and have 50 new things for them to do, and I think that would be almost inappropriate for me to even do that to them.
Well, I also think that there's probably a trust factor over the years that they think, this is good for him to go and spend time. And what's good for him is good for us.
Yes. And I have had some other people from my work have taken their own retreat there, and which I've never encouraged anybody to do, but if they know I do it, and so I'm glad to see that some of them have benefited from it. Or I encourage people to take retreats other places. It doesn't have to be at Assumption Abbey. I just happen to, have deep connections there.
Sure.
But I think that we can all benefit from what the monks call a time apart.
Yep.
Yep. I'm sure you know what I'm.
Yeah,
absolutely. I know you know what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. We spent 9 years in England, and there are a lot more Anglican retreat centers than there are Catholic retreat centers. And I remember one day that I just took away and went to this little cabin on the backside of their property, and I mean, it was me, a fireplace, and a notebook.
Oh
And
man.
it was an incredible day to just really sit. But what was really interesting is it took almost half the day to turn my mind off.
Well, good for you. It
I
takes
mean,
me
just
48 hours to do it.
well, at least I journaled it. It took me half a day. Maybe it was still spinning. Maybe I didn't realize what I was doing. But
That's cool.
well, Shawn, as we wrap this up, I'm going to ask you how we can, how people can find you. Is it AskinosieChocolate.com?
Just Askinosie.com.
Askinosie.com. Okay, those will be in the show notes. But if you don't mind, if you'll just close this out, imagine that you're speaking to me as someone just getting started in business. What would be just the sage advice that you wish you would have known 11 years ago? As the wise entrepreneur that's further down the road than most of us, what would you say to us and it's just a good way to close us out today?
Sure. The first thing I would say is make sure your trusted advisors have given you good financial and accounting advice. It sounds kind of boring for me to say that, but I see so many entrepreneurs who don't either understand themselves or have advisors that understand the practicalities of managing a business in today's world from a very reasonable and achievable standpoint. So make sure if you've got a great idea that you've pressure tested it with people who know what they're talking about. And it's so important. The second thing I would say is I encounter entrepreneurs all the time starting out who say, man, I really love what you're doing. That's cool that you're doing these things with farmers and kids in your neighborhood. We're going to do that too. We plan on doing that. We're just going to get a little bit more profitable and, a few more employees before we start. And I say to them, I look them right in the eye and I say, don't wait. Do not wait. Look at us. I mean, we're 16 people. We're feeding almost 1,000 kids a day. We profit share with farmers in 4 different countries. And I encourage people, don't wait. This isn't, what I'm talking about is not the Department of Philanthropy or the Department of Charity at your company. It's you. It's
who you are,
entrepreneur. Yeah. It's you and your partners, and just start small, but don't wait. Why? Because there's a conspiracy of the universe to help you do this. You just have to take a step. Don't plan it. Don't overanalyze it. Just do it. Roll up your sleeves and start serving someone who needs you right now.
Wow. So the internet cut out just a tiny bit on the very first one. Sound financial advice. Can you just unpack that?
Yes. I think that it's important for people to either themselves understand or have trusted advisors who understand if this business is really viable from a financial standpoint. Does it have reasonable and achievable parameters? Can it be pressure tested? And is it something that you can really count on to eventually reach some level of profitability, and look at it from a bunch of different angles? It sounds kind of boring because people are like, oh, I've got this great idea and nobody else is doing it. Well, okay, but have a look at it, or have a friend or more than one friend look at it who really understands the numbers. And it's I think that's really, really critical. And I wish more people would do that.
Yeah. Well, Shawn, thank you so much for your time today. Is there any last thing that I have not asked you about that you would like to add that you think would be beneficial to our listeners?
Not that I can think of, other than, I have a little blog there where I write about these things. I don't just cut and paste from the book, and it's ShawnAskinosie.com. And I try to write about all of these things that you and I have been talking about today, and then some, and I put my email out there on my blog, and entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs at heart to contact me with questions or thoughts, and happy to help in any way I can.
Well, Shawn, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a true pleasure to talk to you. And as I mentioned off camera, so we've known of each other I've known of you for a number of years, but just it's a pleasure to actually put a face with a name and just have a connection there. and just have so many shared experiences. But this has been a true pleasure, and I know our listeners are going to benefit greatly from the time that you've taken to spend today. And listeners, it's your chance now. It's you got two responsibilities. You've got one to listen to the pain points and add feedback, but even more important than that, you have a responsibility to listen to to the wisdom that Shawn has shared and to put that into practice. Because if we do, all boats rise in a rising tide. Shawn, thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.